Noongar lands of southwestern Australia long before football. The 14 families of Noongar gathered together to celebrate their warriors' skills, strength, speed and bravery. In modern times, struggling to survive white settlement, the Noongar warriors rose once more, using their ancient skills to create Noongar Footy Magic.
When you cross that white line, you just get out there and do the best you can.
I've always taken an approach where I've always wanted to enjoy it, whatever I did in life.
Nice play, Phil Krakouer. He's going about 40 metres.
And football was no different.
That was magic football.
Being successful in your field, it makes you proud. That's good for all our race.
Two Indigenous boys with a bit of magic caught the attention of the Victorian crowd.
They had a massive impact on VFL football.
The Crackers are the first time you ever get two Aboriginal players in a VFL/AFL team who play the Aboriginal way.
As footballers, absolute champions.
Phil Krakouer, amazing!
The brothers Jimmy and Phil were trailblazers in the Noongar footballing tradition. On the field, they were not of this world, mesmerising everyone with their skill. Today, however, their name conjures mixed emotions: the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Australia had never seen anything like it. It was thrilling to watch. It was like anarchy and art rolled into one. And that was what made them appear so revolutionary.
Krakouer rose it beautifully. Any score will put North Melbourne in front. And it's a goal! North in front by 6 at VFL Park. What a game of football!
The revolution began in the heart of the Noongar lands, a quiet farming town, Mount Barker, 4 hours drive southeast of Perth.
Just a farming town, population probably only a few thousand.
Growing up in Mount Barker was the most unbelievable lifestyle I've ever had. I was surrounded by love.
Born into a family of 13, and incredibly, they shared a simple 2-bedroom shack on the edge of town with very few basic amenities.
It's just a little tin shack and it had no water, no electricity, and you just lived by tilly lamps or candlelight.
If it rained, there was rain coming in everywhere. You'd certainly wake up early in the morning because the sun came through at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Things were so hard, you know.
And this remains of our little mansion. They named this place Hollywood. I don't know why, but that was it. I didn't realise how close to the railway line we were, so that's pretty close over there.
You didn't need an alarm clock there, so you're woken up every morning by the Perth to Albany Express. So.
On the other side of Hollywood, even closer, were sale yards.
Farmers used to come from all over southwest Western Australia and they used to auction sheep. Literally not even the gold square from our front door. And we used to be on shows and everyone used to be looking down at you, and that's where Aboriginal people lived. And I remember saying to myself at a particular time, one day I've got to get out of this, I've got to get away. Kicking a football's all about timing. So we used to kick a stone around. So if you kick a stone and it doesn't hurt you, you must be timing it all right.
Most of the time we had footies in our hands. Philip and myself used to handball as close to Dad as possible without hitting him. And
at school, without books, they had steps of how to kick, how to mark, how to handball, and you were just obsessed with trying to be as good as you can.
With Jimmy and Philip, they just loved moving. Running was their life. As soon as they got out there, they was running and they knew the game was on. It couldn't be stopped, well, so be it.
This is SOUNNESS Park. Back when I started off here, there was 2 footy clubs, the North and South Mount Barker, but we both shared this oval. And behind us on the other side of the oval, there's that's where I started off with my junior footy, stepping stone to go on further. So, yeah, this was where it all started.
From the moment Jim stepped onto SOUNNESS Oval, the locals knew they had a prodigious talent in their midst. But it wasn't to be a smooth path. At the age of 17, he had been convicted of 2 serious crimes. Some people saw Jim as a very angry young man.
When the North Mount Barker Football Club committee secretly arranged for Jim to be released from custody to play a must-win game, many in the town were outraged. North Mount Barker won on the day, but the plot to spring Jim still divides the town.
He used to get upset with people who had a go at him. Philip used to shrug it off and would have a laugh about it. Jim took it to heart.
Playing football was a welcome relief from his off-field troubles.
Jimmy won the best and fairest. It was called a Kleeman Medal, which was massive because he was so young.
Having one brother in your side was good, but having 2 would be even better.
The following year I came along, there were 4 medals you can win, and I actually won a lot of them. I felt that was a massive achievement, being only 17 years of age.
That same year, Jim joined the juniors program at the Claremont Football Club.
Jimmy Krakouer.
Dad used to bring us up for a few practice games and then Claremont Colts from there. Dad was a very good player, played a lot of games for North Mount Barker. My mum's brothers, they were pretty gifted players.
Both Mum and Dad instilled values. Indigenous, non-Indigenous people were exactly the same. There was good and bad in everyone. And Dad had a lot of friends that were non-Indigenous, which back then was quite rare.
While Jim was playing footy, Phil was thinking about following in his father's footsteps and becoming a shearer.
Jimmy was up in Perth playing football, and I remember shearing a sheep, the handpiece, I went across 2 my fingers and almost cut my fingers off. I remember saying to Dad at the time, that's it, I've had enough. I'm going to go and play football. Okay, like that, and I just jumped in the car and drove off.
The brothers had swapped a small country town to rub shoulders at a club in the gilt-edged western suburbs of Perth.
Well, 1977 was my first year as coach at Claremont, having come back from Essendon, and the real attraction was the ability perhaps to play them together.
You know, Claremont's a very rich area. You got Peppermint Grove, and there's lots and lots of rich people around that sort of area. And, you know, whoever thought back in the 70s that Claremont would embrace 2 Aboriginal players?
That part didn't really bother me much, them being a rich club. I just wanted to try to do good for yourself and the club.
They were all, totally focused on their football, coming down to training and playing the games. So we just had to make sure that we looked after them off the field as well as on the field.
You know, they looked after us pretty good.
Forward. Phil Krakouer up. Oh, great mark. What a mark by Phil Krakouer.
The magical partnership almost didn't happen. Both boys struggled adjusting to city life and the demands of a top-flight footy club.
I thought about giving it a miss. We had a big family and then we had a lot of cousins and stuff like that, so it was hard to leave Mount Barker.
Jimmy was scared, but Mum used to come a lot and support him.
Just wanted to try to prove yourself, I guess.
I remember training at Claremont, and each time it got hard, in my mind, I thought about the shearing shed, and I just kept on pushing and pushing and pushing because I wanted to be a footballer. The shearing was too hard.
But the wealthy Claremont Football Club was struggling before the Crackers arrived.
Oh, up went Krakouer from behind.
Crowds were thin on the
A
ground.
magnificent mark.
As I was going to Claremont watching the game, the grounds was very empty. And then a lot of people said they need to go and watch the Krakouer brothers because they was pretty football.
Well, he gallops away from Solon.
With the boys' arrival, there was a transformation.
Right on the belly button with a beautiful skimming pass.
I was a Claremont supporter. Not many Noongars that barrack for Claremont, but I think when the Crackers came along, a lot of the Noongar supporters came along and supported the Crackers and supported the Claremont Footy Club.
Handballed out by Phil Krakouer, knocked on by Farmer to Jim Krakouer. There's another goal as he hooks it back from 12 metres out.
Well, I was obviously the number 1 ruckman at the club at the time. I used to develop strategies with Jim in the centre bounces to palm the ball down to him. Jimmy would flick out a handball to Phil, and Phil would do a stab pass to Warren Ralph leading out from full forward and Warren to kick a goal. I wouldn't have to leave the centre circle because the ball would come back for the next goal.
Drops back, Krakouer has it now. Look at him weave and bob, he's in all sorts of trouble. Who's going to help him? Nobody, it doesn't matter. He breaks the tackle, runs it towards goal, shoots it in and they leave it. Right goes!
The brothers set local footy on fire.
Step and goal by Jimmy Krakouer. It's close. It's a goal. It's a goal. It's a goal.
But with success come personal attacks from the opposition. Quietly spoken Jim felt them the most.
Get a few smart asses there. Might say a few things wrong, black bastard or something like that, but you just have to try to ignore them.
A high kick up.
By the end of the 1970s, Claremont had become a powerhouse in the West Australian football competition.
1978 was a real disappointment. 1979, we finished on top of the ladder and we went out straight sets.
This will be a miracle goal.
1981 was probably the most unbelievable, most incredible year that I was involved in football.
Jimmy Krakouer.
In a record-breaking season, Claremont was only beaten twice in the home and away games.
And full points.
At the end of the season, they faced defending champions South Fremantle.
Well, South were renowned as a really tough side. Claremont, their handbag side, I guess. College boys.
Not only was South Freo tough, but coach Mel Brown had recruited an array of gifted Indigenous talent.
Short step to Stephen Michael. Mark of the day.
With so much talent on display, the stage was set.
Approximately 50,000 people. As umpire Ross Capes bounces the ball for the 1981 grand final. Claremont kicking to the left of the screen and Rioli takes the first kick.
That is
High one,
until
straight up off underneath it.
the Basil Campbell hit. Now the only skills on display were more at home in the boxing ring.
I have not seen an opening to a grand final like this. And
Right in the thick of it was Jimmy.
A few incidents happened there, sort of all nervous and raring to go.
But in the heat of battle, South Fremantle star ruckman Stephen Michael broke ranks and crossed the line.
I still remember today on the scoreboard side where there's a big brawl. I love Jimmy and Phil. Jim and Phil's my relations. I went and grabbed them.
If Basil Campbell had hit Jimmy Krakouer at the centre bounce down at the start of the game, he would have landed at Rottnest.
And just began wrapping around and just dragging them both away.
I remember him sort of grabbed me.
Notice that Stephen Michael went in to kill Jimmy Krakouer.
That was good because Big Basil, he was throwing a few hits there, and if one of them would have connected, I think might have been there to play the rest of the game. So.
More directly in front is Jimmy Krakouer. Plenty of temperament. And that could be the sealer for the 1981 premiership.
They cost us the grand final. Morris Rioli got cramp in the third quarter and that little bloody Phillip got the ball.
Tailor-made on his left foot if he can handle it. Breaks
Kicked
clear.
the goal that put him in front. I could have strangled them.
There's the sirens and great scenes here at league headquarters. Yes, there's...
Jim, 88 games and 214 goals, and Phil, 90 games and 192 goals, had what all players strive for, a premiership. Now the big money was on offer from Victoria. The obvious VFL choice was North Melbourne, with its Noongar coach, Barry Cable.
Sure, looked up to Cabes. He's a champion player.
Cable doing a great job.
When he went to coach at North Melbourne, that played a big part in us sort of signing and going there.
When I went to North, I said if we could get them over, they could help us go where we wanted to go.
But getting them to cross the continent and live a long way from their family wasn't straightforward.
In Jim and Phil's case, you know that you really want them. You don't want to miss out to another club. You want to get them. Well, then that puts the pressure on.
I remember coming to Melbourne in 1979. We stayed in the Melbourne Hotel. I'm used to seeing the Mount Barker top pub or the bottom pub. I've never seen anything like this sort of place.
It was always the Krakouer brothers. That's who we were recruiting.
That time, we only stayed probably 1 or 2 nights and then got out of it because we just didn't like Melbourne, didn't want to be here.
Pretty cold and wet and miserable.
Ron persevered, and he wasn't going to let this one go. And we developed a very close friendship.
Once they'd made their mind up, and that was the big call that they both had to make, they embraced the club. That's all you can expect to a footballer. Anyone that you recruit that, when they cross the white line, they're going to go out there and give their best. Well, those blokes certainly did that.
Jim and Phil were about to become the highest paid stars of a star-studded team.
Keith Gregg and Malcolm Blight, Wayne Schimmelbusch, a lot of champion players, and you want to try to prove yourself in the best league.
I remember back in '82, I didn't know if I could survive or get a game. There was a lot of hard work to be done.
Phil and I used to handball and kick to each other after training. We used to do 100 on the left and 100 on the right.
I wanted to make people that I know connected to me proud of what I was about to try to achieve.
The crucial test was their second game and first at home in front of the fanatical Arden Street crowd.
There was a lot of nerves. It just happened that day. The ball bounced properly. You kind of got in the zone where you felt that a lot of things you're doing was going right for you.
It was a big game and a little bit fired up that day.
Looks for Krakouer, finds him. Krakouer removes it with half forward.
That was my first taste of, wow, you know, this is what this is all about.
Put it through for another one.
And the crowd got very, very vocal, started to embrace you.
That is the Krakouer boys in action.
I remember at the end of the game, someone said, I've just been in a bomb scare. And I said, what do you mean? You know, like, I was ready to evacuate. And they said, oh, the joke was a couple of crackers went off.
I think the whole Melbourne fell in love with them, the way that they played and the energy that they gave out every Saturday.
The brothers quickly found that being football stars in Melbourne meant rubbing shoulders with all sorts of people.
Glitz and glamour, with larger-than-life offers, hot betting tips, and the promise of a windfall at the track.
It was a bit of an eye-opener for the boys from Mount Barker.
Jimmy and I got a fair bit of attention, but at that time you didn't know what it was all about.
While for the fans, the talk of the town was the Krakouer Magic.
They were small in stature, but had such a command of the ball.
Phil Krakouer onto the right.
And they had this uncanny brother ability. They knew where the ball was going before the ball knew where it was going.
Two white fellas could be playing together for 10 years and didn't have that same instinct as these boys had.
The crackers, they knew where people were.
They can see the other 35 people on the ground better than anyone else. The other 35 players.
What they're doing. Oh, Krakouer, great play. Copped one but shrugged it over to his brother. The snap at goal is good.
A lot of people still come up and ask the question, how did you do it?
That is the Krakouer boys in action. Brilliantly picked up by Jim Krakouer. Can he finish it?
The secret to it is, you used to look around before the event.
Jimmy Krakouer to Phil.
If the ball was about to be bounced, you'd be assessing what happens if I get the ball. And then as soon as you got it, you knew Jimmy was ready to take off.
We knew how one another played and how one another's more or less thought.
It looked so easy when it did happen because the plan was in place before it even happened.
The times that the crackers took people's breath away, it was nearly always Jimmy to Phil. It was the relationship between them.
It was a great combination, and I think it really set them apart from other Indigenous players and other white players that played the game.
People still talk about it 30-odd years on, so it must have looked all right.
Phil Krakouer seems to have recovered from that knock on the thigh, gets a beautiful bounce and gets
As the Krakouer Magic swept football mad Victoria,
beautiful run by Krakouer.
For opposing clubs, the Noongar boys became public enemy number one.
If Philip got a whack, Jim was straight in there.
We had that special bond to try to look after one another.
Oh, look at Jimmy going after the bloke that went after Phil.
His reaction was spontaneous and at sometimes, pretty brutal.
Pretty emotional game, sometimes you lose your temper a little bit.
And if aggression didn't pay off, there was always the tried and tested racist card.
It used to hurt when people would shout out or the players, call you a black sheep.
I think that Jim found it tough. There were numerous times when he might come into my office on a Monday and vent his anger or just be so frustrated that he was receiving that sort of treatment.
When I was going to school at Mount Barker, I used to cop it down there. I used to think in my mind, I'm an adult now, so I'm not going to put up with it.
And Jimmy did take it to heart. A number of times he'd say privately before tribunals that I only hit that guy because he'd called me a black so-and-so.
It was a much more hurtful thing than I ever imagined it to be.
I think there was a lot of pressure in the clubs at that time not to bring these issues up.
Later on, I guess Michael Long and Nicky Winmar sort of done it politically, but in the early days I used to just retaliate.
In those days, certainly myself, and I probably think the competition didn't understand. And it was another generation way before the game stood up to be counted.
Fortunately for the fans, the Crackers let their extraordinary football skills do their talking most of the time. And by 1985, Jim was having his best year yet.
I think that Jim should have been the first Indigenous Brownlow medalist, and he got reported.
We were walking next to one another and I sort of stuck my foot out and tried to trip him like you do in the old school days.
He got 6 weeks for purportedly kicking Alan Jarrett.
Ron Joseph, he thought it was a bit of an injustice, and we went to court and tried to get it overruled.
When I looked at it all at the end of the season, I can remember thinking to myself, well, if Jim hadn't been suspended for 6 weeks, he would have won the Brownlow.
As they say, all good things must come to an end. After 8 highlight-strewn years, a magical partnership was broken.
At the time of my life, I played with some wonderful guys, made some wonderful friendships. You always will be embraced and protected by the North Melbourne family.
Remember the triathlons down at Willie Beach?
Jimmy went and bought a $1,000 bike and never got to use it. I just remember looking behind at the end of the swim and here he is clinging to a buoy out in the middle of the bay.
So it was Phil, Jimmy and me were the last ones out of the water.
Jim went to St Kilda and Phil went to Footscray. Neither were successful on their own, each playing just a handful of games. Then all of a sudden, it was over. For Jim, the crash was especially tough. The cash dried up and replaced by bills.
Well, when you first start off playing footy, you think you're going to play for the rest of your life. You start playing and you don't really worry too much. You think, oh, I've got plenty of time. But then you start thinking, what will you do when footy's finished? It's such a big part in your life. When it's not there anymore, you don't know what to do. It's got to adjust your life, and that's, pretty tough.
3 years after retiring, Jim, in order to pay off his mounting gambling debt, was busted in a drug smuggling sting.
He didn't drink, didn't smoke, but Jimmy Krakouer loved to punt. Those who know him believed he broke the law to break free from substantial gambling debts.
Jim received an extremely harsh 16.5-year sentence. The judge said he was making an example of Jim to deter others. His lawyers were outraged. After a series of appeals, Jim had spent 8 years and 3 months inside. He emerged from jail penniless, but unbowed.
Oh, they're pretty happy.
There was Krakouer waiting for the ball to come back from Fairley. He's waiting for him. Oh, Jimmy Krakouer took it beautifully over to Phil Krakouer. Into the open goal goes Phil, and it's another goal.
Jimmy and I felt we were part of that change where people start to view and look at Aboriginal people differently.
Having a bit of success there, I think, might have gave clubs more eagerness to go out and look for Aboriginal players.
In their own way, they've become icons of footy, and people don't talk of Jim Krakouer or Phil Krakouer, they talk of the Krakouer brothers, don't they?
And nothing I saw when they were in their 20s at North Melbourne was any different from what I saw when they were 6. They were gifted.
After all the ups and downs of playing football at the highest level, it's not missing out on the Brownlow that Jim regrets. It's something much closer to home.
And there's one little footy episode in which I've always regretted, and in the under-19s thirds for North Mount Bark, and we'd won every game bar the grand final, so that always haunts me, but yeah, well, that's the way it is, I guess.